I have been talking an awful lot about the Buck Rogers TV series lately, and this has got me thinking about another great science fiction entertainment extravaganza from that era. As you may already know from the image of Sam J. Jones that you're looking at right now, I am talking about the 1980 big-budget epic Flash Gordon. I still remember reading about this movie in Starlog magazine. From everything that I could tell, this was going to be it. At long last, the definitive version of Flash Gordon, a movie that quite frankly would give the Star Wars franchise a run for its money. The great Max von Sydow had signed on to be Ming the Merciless, and there were other great actors that I'll talk about in a minute as well. Of course, when I finally got around to seeing Flash Gordon during the school break between Christmas and New Year's, there were a couple of things that really bothered me. The first one was that the movie didn't really seem to be taking itself all that seriously. More on that later. But the real thing that bugged me was that the ginormous Century 21 theater was pretty much empty. At least in the US, Flash Gordon wasn't the blockbuster hit that lots of people thought it would be. Sure, it did alright in some international markets, especially the UK, but Flash Gordon, it turns out, was no Star Wars. And yet, decades later, I still find myself returning to this movie and enjoying the heck out of it. Why? Well, here are my 5 reasons why, quite frankly, Flash Gordon is way better than you remember it being. Let's start with something that I don't think anyone will argue with. The music by Queen is amazing. Brian May and Roger Taylor, they really loved the idea of Queen creating more than just a movie soundtrack, but rather a sonic landscape for this film. And their dedication and commitment to this project really shows up in the finished product. I got 2 cassettes for Christmas in 1980. This one and the Popeye soundtrack. I loved them both dearly. That said, Flash Gordon is still frequently found on my YouTube music playlist. Another reason why Flash Gordon is actually better than we remember is because it really does a good job of honoring its source material. My first exposure to Flash Gordon were the movie serials that got replayed on our local UHF station. Yeah, I know the special effects were horrible. You could see the wires that the spaceships were attached to, but it didn't matter because Buster Crabbe invested so much sincerity into the role. Yep, I really dug those old serials, and the new version of Flash Gordon clearly paid homage to them. The movie also recognized the rich treasure trove, really if you think about it, the endless backstory that could be found in the comic strips and the comic books. I loved the Gold Key comic books. During the mid-70s, these things would be bagged up in lots of 4 at my local department store, and I could pick them up for $1. Quite the deal when you're a kid and every penny counts. I have already mentioned Von Sydow, but the amazing cast is another reason why this film is so good. In addition to Max as Ming, you had Mr. Fiddler on the Roof himself, Topol, as Dr. Hans Zarkov, while Von Sydow played Ming with cold and calculating intergalactic villainous. Topol turned Zarkov into a kind and caring, almost fatherly figure to Flash and Dale. His turn as the good doctor here was full of warmth and charisma. He elevates every scene that he's in. And equally good is Timothy Dalton as Prince Barin. This is before Dalton was cast as James Bond, and it is fun to see the future 007 chewing up the scenery every time he shows up in this movie. Really, folks, Dalton is great in this movie, and there are others as well. Also worth mentioning is actor Brian Blessed as Prince Fulton. Looking back now, 4 decades after the release of Flash Gordon, I am finally ready to give props to the man responsible for one of the most fun science fiction movies ever. And that's not the producer Dino De Laurentiis or the director Mike Hodges. Instead, it's this guy. I know you probably don't recognize him, but you know his work. His name is Lorenzo Semple Jr., and he was the screenwriter for Flash Gordon. He was brought in late to the project after director Nicholas Roeg bowed out of the project, and he immediately recognized that this movie needed an element of camp to it. Now this should not be really all that surprising because Semple was the brains behind the 1966 phenomenon that was the Batman TV series. Most television historians acknowledge that it was Semple's idea to give that show a lighter, slightly comedic tone, and he recognized that kids would watch for the adventure while the parents could watch for the humor. I believe that when he was brought on board to the Flash Gordon project, Semple quickly realized that he could have a lot of fun while still staying true and respectful to the legacy and history of Flash Gordon. One more really cool thing about Flash Gordon was the eye-popping, super beautiful but not very realistic special effects. There was lots of blue screen work being done, and that meant that the SFX team could have some really amazing pop art style backgrounds dispersed throughout the movie. The effects work was very much the opposite of the trend at the time, which, even with sci-fi movies, was more of a gritty and realistic feel. Instead, those involved with Flash Gordon threw that style out of the window and said, we're going to do something completely different, with a wink and a nod to the shoestring budget effects of the old Flash Gordon serials. So there you go. My 5 reasons why I believe Flash Gordon is way better than you remember. One last picture, this time of Flash Gordon with Princess Aura, played by the lovely Ornella Muti. Alright, now it's your turn. What did you think of Flash Gordon? Share your memories in the comments section. While you're at it, I would love a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. Maybe even share it on Facebook or Twitter, and I would be honored if you would consider subscribing to my channel. I talk about music, movies, and television, mostly from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. You know, the good stuff. But most importantly, as always, thank you so much for watching.